In recent years, a number of mental health professionals who work with veterans or with persons who have experienced trauma have begun to use the term moral injury. Moral injury has been defined in somewhat different ways, with clinicians typically describing it as having to do with how profoundly formative life experiences, such as a trauma, can significantly alter the ways in which people understand their own sense of moral integrity and the way in which they interpret the character and moral integrity of others. While the term moral injury may be relatively new, the idea, of course, refers to a very old and pervasive human experience. We have struggled throughout the ages with questions of, what have I done and what have I become, in the midst of human conflict, war, and reflective review of our experiences in these contexts. In this third video of our four-part series on faith communities, mental health, and veterans, we explore the experience of moral injury, relying in large part on the experiences of select military veterans who have kindly agreed to be a part of this project. As you watch, we invite you to think about ways that your community can help address moral injury, whether it be that of a veteran or that of someone else who has gone through a different sort of challenging or life-changing experience.
Hello, I'm Father Bill Cantrell. At the end of the second video in this series, Dr. Warren Kinghorn spoke of the events that led to the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. People have been found to respond in a variety of ways to the experience of trauma. Not all persons who experience trauma develop PTSD, whether they are a veteran or not. Some may even experience different forms of post-traumatic growth. In this video, we will explore a related yet distinct experience from PTSD that can occur when there is an injury to an individual's moral conscience, resulting from an act of perceived moral transgression, or what has been called moral injury. The concept of moral injury has been most frequently applied within mental health care to describe experiences of military veterans who have witnessed or perpetrated an act in combat that transgress their deeply held moral beliefs. Those who identify with the construct of moral injury often claim a loss of their sense of self. Having said that, moral injury is not limited to military combat, but can be the result from a range of traumatic experiences. But for our purposes, we will focus on examples among veterans and military service members. The concept of moral injury seems to describe what many have said they feel, a sense that their fundamental understanding of right and wrong has been violated, and the grief, numbness, shame, and guilt that often ensues. With moral injury, there appears to often be a spiritual dimension more significant than with other concepts in mental health care. Here we find perhaps an area where communities of faith can truly honor, care for, and support those who have fought on behalf of our country, who may be counted among those who have sacrificed and paid a great price, and now who suffer in mind and soul. This is an opportunity for faith communities to make a great difference in their lives. First, we're going to hear from Michael, a combat veteran who is a divinity school graduate and a current PhD student, as he discusses the struggle of reconnecting when he returned home from war.
So moral injury as a concept has really started to gain popularity in the academy, even beyond its application to combat veterans. And I had not heard of this term, moral injury, but I was immediately struck by its potency to name some of my deepest feelings and emotions about war and about my involvement in war. For some it means quite basically a betrayal of one's sort of moral core. We might think of a person as holding a a set of moral values and may come from a religious background, a belief system, or just a way of being in the world, a way of perceiving the world, a way of behaving in the world. And in war, those moral values and guidelines are often betrayed by necessity to accomplish whatever mission is being pursued. But that's kind of an act, and it can be misleading to think of it as an act that happens in an instant. And it doesn't really say much about the injury portion of it to say that if I betray my moral conscience, that constitutes a moral injury, because an injury sort of goes on after time. I'm attempting to explore moral injury currently for my own work as an identity crisis, as a learning that who a person thinks she is or thought she was is not who she actually is, morally speaking. It's a real schism, a kind of break with how a self thinks of oneself. Growing up, learning all sorts of nice little lessons we all learn, and behaving in such a way, more or less consistently through one's life, one develops a sense of identity that encapsulates all of those lessons and those formations and that experiential time. And then at some point, though again, it's not necessarily an instant. It could be a recognition over time. There's a break with that identity. There's a crisis of finding out that I'm actually something quite different.
Michael has described his journey into the exploration of moral injury as an identity crisis. How might faith communities contribute to helping someone rediscover their identity? Isn't that really what the themes of return and redemption are all about? As we continue, consider how your faith community could use your faith traditions to contribute towards one's rediscovery of their sense of self. How might you create the space for them to begin to consider the possibility of once again living with hope? If the signature of moral injury is shame, can you provide acceptance and non-judgment? If they are carrying guilt, does your faith offer forgiveness and reconciliation? Just entering the doors of a place of worship may take significant courage for one who is in the midst of a moral struggle. What might you do to make that easier? Now let's turn to Dr. Kinghorn as he describes training and conditioning in the military, the experience and chaos of war, and how the context of war can be experienced as surreal. He will also speak to the common complaint by service members about valorizing. Dr. Kinghorn will provide you with important information about those areas of veteran interaction that can be sensitive and how those who are well-meaning can avoid some of the pitfalls.
Every aspect of military training and formation and experience is in some way a process of moral formation. Part of, say, basic training, if you're a Marine or Army infantry person, is to learn how to act in situations of significant stress, to be able to not only look out for your comrades, but also to be able to kill when necessary and when that's done under appropriate and valid orders. It's also how to be trained to be able to execute the mission. And that even basic training is a process of learning how to do that. It involves maybe some overcoming of human resistance to inflicting violence or to killing others. Also, combat is can be a very chaotic kinds of experience, that soldiers and service members see things and see others doing things, both combatants and non-combatants, that are very hard to make sense of, that break apart any sense of the moral orderliness of the world. Come back having seen things and remembering things that seemed to exist before only in the imagination, if that. The idea of the world as a basically good place and a safe place where one knows how to exist and how to maneuver is in some cases lost in the sands of Iraq or Afghanistan or the jungles of Vietnam. And then the service member returns, in our context, to an American civilian culture in which at any given time less than 1% of the population is active duty military, in which increasingly small percentage of the population has ever seen war firsthand, and often doesn't want to talk about war, doesn't want to talk about how complex our recent American wars have been. And so there's the expectation that the service member returns into a civilian culture and somehow reintegrates into that culture. And yet the service member, the veteran, is bearing all of the experience that he or she has seen and witnessed and done. And that hasn't gone away. It's right there in rural North Carolina or in Chicago or in Southern California. It's right there in the experience. And it comes into the faith community also. To use language like, the returning warrior, especially the returning hero, to valorize the experience of service members. And very well-intentioned people in congregations and faith communities can do this, meaning to honor and to welcome veterans. But imagine what it would be like if you were in Iraq and had done some things and seen some things in Iraq that were deeply troubling, that you really didn't have any category to know what to do with. Maybe you had seen children killed. Maybe you had seen women sexually assaulted or violated. Maybe you had seen things happen among your service member colleagues that were not part of the military rules of engagement, but were never reported. Maybe not. Maybe it was seeing carnage and destruction. Maybe it was seeing how awful people who were not combatants or were civilians treated each other in the context of war. Whatever that is, let's say that you weren't sure how to make sense of that. Let's say that you'd wondered about your own decisions or wondered about how to bear that own experience. And then you come back to church the first week after you've gone and people say, "Oh, welcome back, so-and-so from Iraq. You're a hero. Thank you for your service." Well, that might be deeply welcome, and in many cases is. It's always well-intentioned. But it can also send a very clear message to a veteran. These people see me as a hero. They see me as somebody who they're proud of. So I can't talk about those aspects of my service that I'm not proud of. I can't talk about those areas in which I'm still struggling because this isn't a safe place to do that. These people don't want to hear that. That's important to avoid. So my general advice to anyone in a faith community is when a veteran returns home, the appropriate response is not, tell me all about it, tell me what it was like in the context of war, but simply to say, welcome home. We're glad that you're home. And we're here to walk with you. Whatever that looks like. And it's going to be different for every service member and every veteran. And in that, to avoid pigeonholes and pedestals. So to avoid assuming anything about someone's experience. Don't assume that someone has killed. Don't assume that someone hasn't killed. Don't assume that someone has done only what was clearly described to others as their role. Always leave open the possibility that there's things that you don't know about, that nobody might know about, and yet that veteran may carry with them into the community. Leave that space open for then people to be able to understand themselves, to be able to walk on their own timetable, to be able to talk about their experience when and if they're ready, in a way that's free from expectation and pedestaling and pigeonholing.
Dr. Kinghorn has provided us with a number of helpful tips about reaching out to veterans and interacting with them. Having served alongside thousands of service members over the past 22 years during 4 deployments and all kinds of training in combat zones, hospitals, and exercises, I can tell you that his advice to assume nothing is spot on. In addition, he cautions us regarding valorizing or making heroes of everyone we know who wears or has worn the uniform. Sometimes the last comment that one struggling with moral injury wants to hear is affirmation for something they've witnessed or perpetrated that has left them in suspense of their former self. It might well be received as a shallow and uninformed comment, while it was intended to be a statement of recognition and appreciation. While I don't pretend to know the best or the perfect way to acknowledge one's military service and don't advocate for eliminating thank yous altogether, being present to the individual and intentionally attempting to genuinely welcome them into the community can be more meaningful than well-intentioned, but not always well-received, thank you statements. Faith communities can build relationships and welcome veterans by being willing to take time to create a safe space for veterans to share their story when they are ready, to listen to their story without judgment, to assume nothing, to not easily solve their problem with statements like, "You had no choice," or "It wasn't your fault." Matt, a Marine Corps veteran who has served in multiple combat deployments, and his wife Callie will now talk a little about their own experience and thoughts about the challenges of veterans seeking to integrate into a faith community.
The biggest way to have a veteran open up to you or have a combat vet open up to you is to gain their trust, to let them know that you care and understand. Like that you're just there for them and you care, and you don't even care about what happened, you just care about them and care about who they are, not who they were or what they went through. Mm-hmm. You know, because a lot of, we were at church the one time and we had a potluck dinner, and out of the blue, the guy, a member from the congregation was just like, "So, Matt," in front of everybody, I mean, there's like 30 people there. He's like, "Matt, tell us what you went through in Iraq." And I'm like, what, like, what do you want to know? Like, kind of put me on the spot and made me feel like very uncomfortable, very like, like, what do you want to know? Like, all the people I killed, all my brothers I lost, like, what do you want to know? Like, that's a very personal question and not the place to be asked, in front of the whole congregation. So get to know them. It's part of being a community and being a family, essentially, is what church should be. So get to know the people in your church, not just their name, but like just who they are and where they come from. And once they get to that point where they can trust you and trust that you actually care about them, then a lot of times they'll just automatically open up to you. It might take a little more than that, but I mean, that's the first step.
Well, I could say too, just in general, if something's coming from a place of love and a place of caring, I think that speaks for itself. So, while Matt's talking to me about more of an in-depth relationship, I've also seen where, we have friends that, they just really are not, they don't know much about the military. And so we've been in conversation one-on-one where they're just like, "Hey, I just want to know, what was it like over there?
Yeah.
Tell me about it. I just really want to know what it was like over there." And then that's honest, open communication that's been really awesome. And then this person's like, "I had no idea. Thank you so much for telling me." And, we didn't even know this person that well. But it came from a place of just really interested and caring and not trying to, make a scene or make a point out of something or, show pony you or anything like that. It was just a genuine wanting to understand.
The spiritual, existential, and religious distress experienced by someone suffering from moral injury presents faith communities with both challenges and opportunities. As you seek to embrace those who are suffering, we invite you to consider the following questions. What does moral injury look like? Have you ever encountered it before? Has it been within the confines of your faith community or outside? Ask yourself also, does your faith community make room for people to wrestle with morally injurious life experiences? For instance, how do we make room for the emotional and spiritual struggles of moral injury, while accepting individuals as faithful members of our community? And finally, ask yourself, how can we best care for people coping with moral injury? Consider resources to draw upon from your faith tradition. In doing that, also think about the differences between recovery and growth and how this understanding might inform your care practices.